All right, everybody, I got a video here for you today. Obviously, I'm joined by a special guest, Brien. I want to thank you a lot for joining me here today.
My pleasure, Chuck. Pleasure to meet you.
It's been about 8 years since I've been watching your videos, and I even watched your videos before I started making videos, so that seems like ancient history to me in itself, and got a lot of questions here. First of all, I just want to talk about the whole skull thing. Now, I first got interested in this, I think before I even started watching your videos, a gentleman by the name of Lloyd Pye and the Star Child. Did you know Lloyd personally?
I did. I never actually physically met him, but he and I were in correspondence for a couple of years, and he was going to come down and be on tour in Peru with me, but then unfortunately he died. So.
Now, can you just talk about the latest findings on the Star Child? Has there been anything recently? I just haven't stayed caught up.
No, I don't think there's any. I don't think there's been anything much since Lloyd died. It was taken over by the Star Child Foundation, and I was in correspondence with their chairman for probably 6 months, but I haven't seen any new publications or videos or anything. It's gone very quiet.
Okay, now can you just talk about the whole elongated skull research that you are heavily into, and just any new findings or anywhere that research is going to go in the near future?
Sure. Well, I saw elongated skulls on TV growing up on shows like In Search Of and stuff like that. But physically, I saw my first one here in Peru about, I think, 12 years ago. It was in a tiny museum. It was more of a mummified head than a skull. Being a biologist, I was fascinated by the shape because it seemed far more complicated than something that could be achieved through head binding. And that's mainly what I've been researching, is the difference between obvious cranial deformation and those that look like they were born that way. And that's, I've been able to see hundreds of them now, including relatively recently a mother and child in a small museum at Lake Titicaca. And I actually had a radiologist from Texas with me. So he's an expert on anatomy, and he said, I think they were mother and baby, and they both died during childbirth. And, the baby's skull was the size of its torso, and the mother's skull, I would say the volume of the mother's skull is twice the size of a normal human being. So that was the first time I was able to actually see the full skeletons, and I was just in complete shock.
Now, that has been a subject that I've kind of got more interested in the more my research has gone on. I've talked about it in ancient Americas, Siberia, Scotland, the South Pacific, worldwide. Is this something that just kind of was inherited from something in the way past, or are they kind of doing this in reverence of something from the way past? Is this one collective thing, cross-culture, do you think?
I don't think there's a common source to it. People keep looking for, one source and then distribution of these cultures, but I can't find one. The Paracas culture on the coast of Peru is very particular. That's where I'm at right now. And they have the largest elongated skulls in the world. We've done DNA testing of about 20 different skulls, and we're able to find out that their closest relatives appear to have lived around the Black Sea area of Eurasia around the same time, like around 3,000 years ago. The skulls there look very similar, and the maternal DNA appears to be very, very, very similar. Only 2 of the 20 skulls that we examined were Native American DNA. So that's probably the most curious thing. We're hoping to do more DNA study in the future, but this, this pandemic thing has caused problems in every which way, from travel to access to laboratories, etc. But now stuff is opening up here, thank God. So I'll start to get to do more stuff now.
Now, I heard you mention In Search Of, and I think when I was doing my talk with Ben or somebody, I mentioned that was one of the things as a kid that got me interested in ancient history. Is that something you can look at from your past, saying kind of got me interested on this path that you're on?
Yeah, well, it was probably the first TV series that actually had some kind of hard evidence to it.
Right,
And,
right.
always a fan of Leonard Nimoy from Star Trek, so yeah, I think I watched every single episode of that, and he would bring. It's kind of like Ancient Aliens did the same thing. They would show you sites and things that probably no other TV show would present. Not just the standard stuff like the pyramids of Giza or whatever, but all sorts of obscure things like this. And so that was it's a very groundbreaking TV series, I thought.
Yep, I think I have about a dozen of those episodes uploaded on my channel somewhere. And he did some really good research for that far back and what was known and you had access to. It's not like today where you could just look up stuff on the internet. I thought he did some great research.
Yeah, me too.
Now let's talk a little bit about your book. I believe it's called Aftershock, the Ancient Cataclysm that Erased Humanity. Mm-hmm. Now this is a subject that a lot of us have gotten interested in the last few years. And I did a video back, I think about 7 years ago, where I talked about maybe something hitting the North American ice cap, and I mentioned a book that I had read by Allen and Dallaire.
Oh, good.
Now we are not the first people. There was people quite a while ago that were writing about something really, really bad happening. Can you just talk about a few of those authors that you mentioned in your talk about your book?
Yeah. Well, Allen and Dallaire were fundamental. And then also Barbara Hand Clow, who's more famous as an astrologer than anything else, but she took up their research afterwards. And Dr. Robert Schoch, of course, with his theories about the weathering of the Sphinx and stuff like that, and plasma ejection from the sun. And then Dr. Paul Laviolette, who talks about the black hole in the center of our galaxy erupts every 13,000 years. So all of these researchers are talking about the same time frame, and even Graham Hancock's friend Randall
Carlson.
Yeah, Randall Carlson. He talks about this cycle of 13,000 years of devastation. He even makes a logical point of view about the existence of Atlantis. So he's a very brilliant person.
Now let's just talk about Atlantis just for a minute or two. Do you think it's odd that so many people poo-poo the idea of Atlantis, even though, forget about Plato, but the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Mayans saying that their civilization came from people who survived a cataclysm or their island sank, or maybe got covered up by rising water? Do you think we should kind of accept the idea of Atlantis a little more just based on what the Mayans and the Egyptians are telling us?
Yeah, I think definitely. Again, it's the same time, the same time period. Everyone goes back to Plato because he's the first written source about it, but he talks about the same time frame as well. He's
right.
Very specific, and he was taught through the knowledge of his ancestor Solon, who said the same thing. 11,700 BC approximately, or 12,000 to 13,000 years ago was the time frame, and Solon learned it from the dynastic Egyptian priests. So I think there has to be some kind of credibility to it. Just because we know that there were these cataclysms, you would have very rapid sea level rise that would cause, like any advanced civilization would have a presence on the coast, and if that coast was rapidly disappearing, then if you were lucky, you were able to escape and go somewhere. There are some logical places where they would have gone, like the Nile Delta of Egypt, maybe into the Andes of Peru, that correlating with the megalithic stuff that we see.
Now let's just talk a little bit about Egypt. The Great Pyramid, the Sphinx. Everybody's kind of that does our type of research is looking for a deeper history. Do you think that's just going to be accepted here in the next upcoming years from all that we are uncovering? And it seems like we're making a lot of discoveries as the years are going on here, and they're coming quick and fast.
Yeah, I think so. So I think the newer generation of Egyptologists and archaeologists have a much more open mind. A number of them have been watching my videos, for example. And even the guides up in Machu Picchu who watch my videos say, oh my God, I had no idea that there was a difference between, the megalithic stuff and what we call the Inca stuff. So I think also with the internet, we're able to expose this information. And the academics are generally just becoming quiet now.
Now,
So
when
I think, yeah, I think definitely, this information is moving very quickly. Egypt is opening up much more rapidly than I thought would be possible, like the Osiris Shaft and places like that. And there you're seeing indisputable evidence of stuff that the dynastic people couldn't have done.
Right, right. And there's so much evidence with the type of stone, and you went over that very well in your lecture, that it's just not feasible that the dynastic Egyptians could have done some of the stonework on the granite and the other things. But when you walk into a site in Egypt, are you just struck immediately by the difference between the dynastic work and what became in the pre-dynastic period? Is there a very definite difference?
Oh, yeah. Actually, the good thing we do now is, like, almost every tour will go to Cairo. Then the first thing they do is the Giza Plateau, and then they go to the lesser sites after that. We do the complete opposite. We take people down to the southern area of Egypt, to Aswan, and that's where you see the quarry with the 1,200-ton obelisk that was never finished. Mm-hmm. And then as we cruise up the Nile, then we go through all of the dynastic stuff. You can, it's all sandstone or limestone, pieces put together, and then our final stops are at the Giza Plateau in Saqqara, and people are just blown away because they've seen photographs of this before. But when you go from the dynastic stuff, which is in southern and central Egypt, and then you expose people to the Giza Plateau, they automatically say, whoever built these things did not build the other stuff that we just saw. This is scale.
Now, a video that I have coming up is on Abu Rawash, and some of the earliest explorers describe that as maybe the most ancient place in Egypt. Could you give me some just general feelings you get about visiting that place and what they call Djedefre's pyramid? Is that just totally different than what you see in other places?
Well, there are two theories about it, because it's in very bad condition. Like, you can actually walk down the ramp into the pyramid now. Yep. So either it was never completed, or the other theory is that it was an energetic device that exploded. So there's still a lot of nice, tight-fitting stonework there. There's also evidence of possible geopolymer cement used in ancient times. But it's a much bigger site than what most people realize. There's a huge staircase that Ancient Architects just, that's a YouTube channel. He just did a video about that. And I saw the staircase from a distance. We weren't allowed to go down to it, but it's this massive staircase that goes straight into the bedrock. And we're hoping that this coming March, when we do a tour in Egypt again, we're going to have a special day at Abu Rawash. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to go and enter this staircase, because it's something I've never, almost nobody's been in that.
Right,
and,
right.
Yeah.
I covered that maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. Antoine Giegel, I believe. I mentioned a report that she did from down. That just seems very mysterious. And right near there is a first dynasty necropolis. So if the first dynasty was burying their people, what was the sacred structure at Abu Rawash that, most necropolises are built around a very ancient structure. So, So what was the ancient structure if the first dynasty was putting the necropolis in there? I think it was what they call Djedefre's pyramid.
Okay, well, the great thing about Egypt, and, thankfully the new head of Supreme, Council of Antiquities is actually opening some of this stuff up now, which is great, because Zahi Hawass was locking everything down. Luckily, he's no longer involved in the government. So what I find curious about Abu Rawash and this staircase is Ancient Architects wasn't able to get any photographs from inside the complex. And of course, he based his work on Chagall's photographs. And I don't think she showed any photographs inside. So I want to know where that staircase goes.
Right, right.
It's probably a series of caverns, underground.
Right, because most stairways, they enter something that is much more, huge and complex and has many chambers and all of that. But there is also another structure in Abu Rawash called Lepsius number 1 that the edge of the town is really surrounding right now. And I'd love it if some people got up there, because that is a very mysterious structure. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that is right on the edge of the town. I made a couple videos on it, and that just appears very strange and very weird. And there's First Dynasty tombs built into the side of it. So that is one I wish. And I mentioned that to Ben too, and gave him the location, and hopefully he can get near there when he goes there.
Well, luckily Ben's going next month, and the unfortunate thing about Egypt, though, is that it depends who the caretaker is of the site. You could go to one site and even give them money, bakshish and stuff, and so they'll go, oh, okay, I'll just open, they'll unlock doors for you to go inside.
Sure.
And others will just say, no way.
Right.
Yeah, now, it's a toss-up.
Now let's talk a little bit about Peru.
Okay.
This is something that's just fascinated me since I started watching your videos, especially Sacsayhuaman, I believe that is. Now, those huge stones, do you have any theory on how they were made? I mean, some of them, it seems like they were almost heated and melted into place, the way their angles and the way they all lock together. That just seems so odd and different from anything we see anywhere else. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's the great thing about these sites, these megalithic places in Peru, is that we don't find evidence of tool marks. When you go to Egypt, you see saw marks and tube drill holes and stuff like that. But whatever the technology involved, was in Peru, it was way more advanced than Egypt. Egypt is the sense of scale. But in Peru, it's mind-boggling. And I've had a number of engineers go with me and stonemasons. And the only theory that they come up with is whoever these people were who were able to do this construction where you have, super tight fitting, every stone a different shape and size and stuff, is that whoever did this had to have been able to manipulate matter somehow, like temporarily make the stone like marshmallow material. Right. And that's the prevailing theory now, because there is no other possible explanation.
Do you get a little offended when that is attributed to the Inca? I mean, the huge blocks that seem melted and just, absolutely perfect. Some you can't even slide a piece of paper through. And then you have the relatively inferior stuff on top. And then they attribute that to one culture. If one culture was making something perfect, would they top it with something that isn't even close? That just seems so strange.
Yeah, well, why are the stones on the bottom always more precise and bigger than the stones on the top? That's the case at Sacsayhuaman. You have the first wall where stones are up to 110 tons, then the second tier, maybe 40 tons, and then the third tier, maybe 10 tons. And to attribute that all to the same culture is ridiculous. It's obvious that the Inca found an abandoned megalithic city and made it their center because of that. They didn't, find Cusco as nothing and build it. They found something that had been catastrophically damaged, and then built on top and around all these ancient structures.
Right, and even the explorers, the Spanish explorers who put out journals, who were there maybe in the 1500s, it seems that the Inca were even telling them that this is like the work of the gods, and we are just living here to kind of honor them. I mean, it seems like the Inca were even telling us that, and people don't really even pay much attention to that. It seems the standard model of history needs to be updated quite a bit.
Yeah, well, the basic story supposedly is that when the Spanish first arrived in Cusco and they saw Sacsayhuaman, they said, "Did you build this?" And they said, "No, this was here when we got here."
Right.
The Inca were admitting, like you said, that someone had been there before with technology beyond our capability. And the difference between Inca work and megalithic work is night and day. It's not shades of gray, it's black and white.
Now let's talk about another site where the Spanish got there, and the Aymara. We're talking about Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, and they said clearly this was in ruins when we got here. Now, Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, are those two different periods of history, or
No.
were those built at the same time? And
yeah, they were built at the same time. They have different names because they're behind different fences. They're about a quarter mile from each other, but both showed like major megalithic work. Pumapunku looks like it was actually buried in mud from this ancient cataclysm and wasn't even discovered by the Aymara, but was discovered by Poznański, the first Bolivian archaeologist who went there. But Tiwanaku has, it has pillars that are like 20 feet tall that would have been protruding out of the mud. And then you see the rough construction work that the Tiwanaku people would have made. And then later, the Spanish who built the little town of Tiwanaku recycled the stone from that site and Pumapunku to build their foundations of their houses. Like you just walk down the street and then you look and you go, oh, there's a 10-ton block, and there's a 20-ton block. So yeah, it's been recycled, recycled, recycled.
yeah, I believe Poznański lived there for years, and like archaeoastronomy work, and he attributed that to about 12 or 14,000 years ago, if I remember correctly.
I think he said 17,000.
Oh, really? Okay.
But yeah, he lived in La Paz, but he worked at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku for almost 50 years. And all the academics around the world, he wrote these two huge volumes of detail, and everybody just laughed at him. But now, of course, the joke's on them.
Now, I made a video about 3 years ago where I talked about the Spanish, and right after they heard about the legend of El Dorado, the next place they visited was Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. Do you think some of the original legends of El Dorado could have came from that place, because legend has it was covered in gold? That's where the Spanish went right after they heard about it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it could be. It could be there. Some people talk about El Dorado being in the jungles of Ecuador,
right,
or Colombia.
Yep.
Yeah, but yeah, Tiwanaku was. The Spanish were in Bolivia like very early, just after they were, they went from Peru to Bolivia, which are next door to each other. So Tiwanaku was found very early on in the 1500s.
That place, Pumapunku, just seems so different than other places. That one, if there's any place that I think is, 12, 14, way back in history from a different period of people, Pumapunku is on near the top of my list.
Yeah, mine too.
What are your thoughts about polymer in those stones down there? I think Matt at Ancient Architects did a video on that, some research that was done.
He did, but yeah, that was by a French chemical company who believed that the Great Pyramid was made of geopolymer, which has been disproven because they know where the quarry is. And the same thing, they made a video about Pumapunku as being geopolymer, but we know where the quarry is. And I asked my geologist friend Susan, who's been there with me at least 3 times, because they've been able to carbon date something. You can't carbon date stone, but she thinks that it's actually the roots of ancient lichen that made it date at 12,000, 13,000 years old.
Interesting.
So there's lots of lichen that lives on the surface, very slow growing, but that was her logical answer. The lichen is able to penetrate its roots relatively far into the stone itself. So if they were taking a sample from the surface, that's the only explanation I can think of for finding something carbon-based to radiocarbon test.
Interesting. Interesting. Now let's talk about one more place here, Baalbek. I think my second video I ever did was on Baalbek, and I still haven't come to any good explanation of why they would carve those, 1,300 ton stones down in that quarry that are about 3/4 of a mile from the temple there. Just, do you have any explanation why they would use such large stones and who was actually doing that?
Well, of course, I've been there twice. The first time we went with a local tour guide who kept going on and on and on about the Romans building it. And, you're talking 1200s. They just found one that's 1600 tons. They partially excavated it so you could see how big it is. And she kept going on with that. And, our group was, just going nuts. But I've been there twice now, and you can see there are three different time periods of construction. The upper area is the Middle Ages, so it's very roughly done because they were basically turning Baalbek into a fortress to fight off the Crusaders. And then below that, you have the Roman stuff, which is like pretty big stones, but not that tight fitting. And then you have the foundation blocks, like the Trilithon, where you have three stones in a row that are 1,000 tons apiece. And it's like, again, to see this in person, you just sort of go, oh, okay. Also, there's the amount of patina that's on the ancient blocks make the stones much, much darker than the upper level. So there you're talking about thousands of years of difference in terms of construction. So it looks like whoever was initially building Baalbek made the foundation and then gave up or left or something like that. Probably Cataclysm. Then 2,000 years ago, the Romans arrived. They have this beautiful foundation, so they built on top of it. And then they leave, and then in the Middle Ages, another group come and build. So it's a phenomenal place. The most fortunate thing now is the first time we went, we were limited in terms of what we could see, just because they had a lot of it like locked away. And so the last time we went, our guide Pierre, he said, "What do you want to see?" And I said, "I only want to see megalithic construction." So with his influence, we were able to see every single megalithic block in that. And it's huge.
And they are hoisted into place, right? They are on the second level of construction, those 1,000 ton blocks in the Trilithon, correct?
Yeah, it's either the second or maybe even the third, because they're two massive. The Trilithon, and then the base below that is huge. And then under that, quite a bit smaller. The smaller stones could have been Roman repair work, which is what you see in Peru too. You see where the megalithic stuff was repaired during Inca times, like some of the foundation and things like that. But yeah, Baalbek is absolutely amazing.
Now, one final question on a location, I guess, because this might be the first place that I go visit as far as an ancient mystery, and that is Teotihuacan. And that has always fascinated me. Now, do we really know who originally constructed that place?
I don't think anybody does.
I know there's a lot of guesses, and there's a lot of names, the Toltecs and the Olmecs, the Mayans, of course, but I think that is a pretty interesting thing, that we have that major complex and nobody knows who the hell built it.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately that's typical everywhere you go. You have the standard academic story that's pounded into your head, including Göbekli Tepe, where they say hunter-gatherers built it. It's like, that's ridiculous.
Right.
That's the official story. But Teotihuacan, yeah, it has some megalithic elements to it. The Temple of Quetzalcoatl is a completely different construction than the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of the Moon. You have like massive basalt blocks that look like they have machine marks in them. And then the Temple of the Sun is magnificent in terms of its size, but in terms of complexity, it wasn't complex to make it, but it took a lot of people a long time to do it. But the Temple of Quetzalcoatl is very mysterious. It was obviously rebuilt by, the Teotihuacan people and or maybe the Aztec as well.
And of course, there's the Cholula pyramid that seems pretty big and pretty mysterious and pretty much buried, right?
Yeah, it's supposedly the biggest pyramid in the world, and it's got a big church on top, and the church looks that big compared. Its footprint is bigger than the Great Pyramid. There are tunnels going through. You can go through. Yeah, and you also should go to Tula, because that's where the Tula warriors are, and they're all within like 2.5 hours distance of each other, I think.
I think I've covered about maybe 40 sites in Mexico, and I still have a list. So there's endless sites in Mexico and all over that area. Now, the temple at Quetzalcoatl at Teotihuacan, is that the one where they found the chamber down below with the kind of the mercury and the pyrite on the ceiling and kind of what they think is a representation of creation or something? I wasn't quite sure of the final research on that story.
Yeah, it's down at the end of the whatever it's called, the Walkway of the Dead or whatever.
Avenue of the Dead, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So you have the Temple of the Moon, then the Temple of the Sun, and then a mile down that way is the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. And mysteriously, somebody built another little pyramidal structure in front of it, almost as if to hide it from the public. So that's what makes the Temple of Quetzalcoatl quite mysterious. A very different construction style, staircases where the stones fit perfectly together, you know, and then rubble on top. So yeah, Mexico's amazing.
Now, you've been doing this for quite a while, and I've been making videos for 8 years, and I guess the only thing I've really learned is there's so much more to learn. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, there's so much underground in Egypt that is slowly being opened up. When we went in March this year, we were finally able to go under the step pyramid at Saqqara. It had never been open to the public. You go down the staircase and you walk hundreds of feet underground and then look down this shaft that goes down, I think, a couple of 100 feet to this massive box. You know, who knows what else is there.
Saqqara seems pretty amazing, and people, you know, they don't realize that there's like 1 million animal mummies put down there as offerings to the gods too, and these massive, you know, tunnels going all the way around that complex.
Oh yeah, well, Saqqara supposedly is the largest archaeological site in the world. You're only allowed access to about 5% of it, or 10%. So it goes for miles and miles and miles. But again, it's good that now, you know, Egypt is starving in terms of tourism. So hopefully this will give even more incentive with the opening of the new museum next year, that they'll open up even more of these places like the Osiris Shaft, so that we can, you know, see what really is underground. People talk about there's so much under the sand, but it's not. It's actually what's carved in the bedrock in Egypt, which is mysterious.
All right, Brien. Well, I think we'll just wrap it up here. I just want to say thanks again. You were one of the first ones that inspired me to get into this stuff, and just want to say thanks for that. And I know there's a lot of people all around that really appreciate getting a firsthand look at all these ancient sites, and I just want to say thanks.
Okay, thanks so much.
All right, I will talk to you again soon, maybe.
Okay, great.
All right.